So picture this scenario for a second. You're a learner, right?
Hmm.
And you've spent, I don't know, the last 6 months just relentlessly studying a new language.
Right.
You've got all the flashcards memorized, your grammar is absolutely pristine, and you finally step into a boardroom in a foreign city for this critical meeting.
And you think you're totally prepared.
Exactly. You deliver the greeting perfectly. You use the exact formal vocabulary that the textbook prescribed. But then the temperature in the room just instantly drops.
Oh, yeah, that awful, uncomfortable silence.
Yeah. The native speakers exchange a glance, and you realize you have somehow completely derailed the interaction. Like you used the right words, but you entirely failed the communication.
Well, yeah, because that's the illusion of the linguistic map.
The map.
Right, so traditional education basically gives us this map where languages are plotted on a clean binary grid. You learn the vocabulary of a location, you deploy it, and you expect a completely predictable result.
Like pushing a button.
Exactly, but I mean, a map provides zero information regarding the actual, terrain of human behavior.
Which is really the core focus of our deep dive today. We are looking at this huge stack of sources today, like excerpts from metropolitan archetypes and cultural dialectics, the psychological bridge of language and culture, and the third place, edutainment and language acquisition.
It's a fantastic lineup of research.
It really is. And our mission today, for you listening, is to move way beyond surface-level language learning. We want to uncover the hidden cultural engines that actually drive human interaction across the globe.
Because, yeah, mastering a new culture is way less about memorizing textbooks and, much more about understanding the heartbeat of a city.
Definitely. But before we can understand how to learn a culture's language,
Yeah.
we really need to understand the stage where that culture plays out, right? The city itself.
Absolutely. The literature points to a really fundamental misunderstanding in how we approach global communication. Before we even, analyze the mechanics of learning, we have to look at the environments shaping the language.
Right.
The first source argues that major urban centers aren't just dots on a map. They actually function as distinct cultural archetypes.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because the sources draw a fascinating contrast here, specifically looking at different modes of international business.
Right, they use some great examples.
Yeah, they contrast the highly ceremonial, consensus-driven frameworks that you find in, say, traditional Japanese business practices like in Tokyo.
Yes, very deliberate.
Right, deliberate. And they contrast that with the hyper-transactional, just rapid-fire cosmopolitanism you see in financial hubs like London.
What's fascinating here is that this comparison serves a really specific purpose. It forces you, the learner, to adopt a meta-perspective.
A meta-perspective.
Yeah, because the city literally shapes the cognitive approach of the people living in it. So in a highly traditional consensus-building archetype like Tokyo, the pacing of an interaction is inherently deliberate.
It's slow on purpose.
Exactly. The goal of an initial meeting is rarely to finalize a transaction. The goal is risk mitigation. It's about relationship establishment. Oh, wow.
So the language used will reflect that. It's going to be layered, cautious, highly structured. It teaches us the crucial why behind the interaction.
I think an operating system analogy works perfectly here to explain the mechanics of that.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so think of human nature as the hardware of a smartphone. Regardless of where we live, we all need the same basic functions, right? We need an app for greeting, an app for negotiating, an app for concluding.
Sure.
But these cultural archetypes, they operate as entirely different software ecosystems running on that hardware.
Yeah, the background processes are completely different.
Yes, the background processes. In a traditional consensus-driven operating system, opening that business meeting app requires a massive amount of background RAM.
Right, dedicated to analyzing hierarchy, reading the room.
It's establishing trust, exactly. The app loads slowly by design. The slow pace is a critical feature, it's not a bug, because that system values long-term stability over just, immediate execution. And conversely, right, if you look at the fast-paced cosmopolitan archetype, like the London financial hub from the text, that operating system allocates its memory entirely differently.
It's all about speed.
Exactly. The background processes are minimal. The system prioritizes efficiency, individual agency, rapid capital flow. So when you open the business meeting app there, it is expected to launch instantly, run the transaction, and close.
So going back to our intro, right? That scenario of stepping into the boardroom and having the room go freezing cold.
Right.
That happens because you tried to run a hyper-transactional London app on a consensus-driven Tokyo operating system?
And the system crashed.
Yeah, the vocabulary was mathematically correct, but it crashed because the underlying code and pacing were just fundamentally incompatible.
That crash is exactly what the research identifies as cultural friction, because memorizing the translation of a word doesn't teach you the why behind its usage. A textbook might teach you how to say, let's get straight to the point in another language.
Yeah.
But it won't warn you that using that phrase in a traditional archetype signals aggression.
Or just a total lack of sophistication.
Exactly.
Well, okay, understanding the operating system makes sense intellectually. Like if I read enough sociology, I can grasp consensus building versus rapid transactions.
Sure.
But the second source we're looking at pushes this much further. It argues that recognizing the operating system is entirely insufficient. To actually acquire the language, you have to cross what they call a psychological bridge.
Yeah, this source fundamentally challenges traditional learning mechanics. It defines language acquisition not as a memory exercise, but as an active psychological process. It's deep cultural immersion.
Okay, but wait, I have to play the skeptical learner here for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm just passively listening to a language tape on my commute, repeating phrases on the train, am I actually missing the whole point? Like, is passive listening not enough to just build a database of words?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, building a database is definitely not the same as building fluency.
Okay.
The research is highly critical of passive listening. When you merely repeat a phrase, your brain categorizes it as abstract data. You're still using your native cultural operating system to process foreign sounds.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so this psychological bridge requires moving from passive listening to active engagement. And the text highlights two specific cognitive mechanisms for this: predicting and mirroring.
Let's talk about the mechanics of predicting, because honestly, that sounds almost like a psychic exercise.
Right.
If I'm a learner, how am I supposed to predict what a native speaker is going to say before they say it?
Well, predicting in this context is really high-level pattern recognition. It relies entirely on your understanding of the cultural archetype.
The operating system.
Exactly. If you've internalized that the culture operates on a traditional risk-mitigating framework, you can begin to predict the function of the next sentence, even without knowing the exact vocabulary.
Oh, like anticipating that they'll soften a disagreement
Yeah.
rather than just confronting it directly.
Exactly. You're predicting the rhythm and the intent before the audio even plays.
So you're basically running a cognitive simulation of their operating system in your own head.
That is the exact mechanism. You are simulating their cognitive environment. And once you predict the intent, the literature introduces that second active mechanism, which is mirroring.
Mirroring the native speaker's exact intonation and cultural nuances.
Right, but it's not just mimicking the sound like a parrot. Mirroring requires adopting the physical and emotional posture of the language.
Oh.
It means replicating the exact pitch, the prosody, the hesitations, the pacing.
Which, I mean, that introduces an immense amount of cognitive overhead. And frankly, a massive amount of discomfort.
Totally.
If your native operating system is fast, direct, and individually expressive, and you force yourself to mirror a slow, deliberate, highly restrained cadence, that feels incredibly unnatural. It feels inauthentic.
It absolutely creates cognitive dissonance. But that discomfort is the psychological bridge.
Interesting.
You're basically being asked to temporarily suspend your own cultural ego, your ingrained habits of expression, and adopt completely foreign persona.
Wow.
It requires deep empathy, and not empathy like feeling sorry for someone, but cognitive empathy, the ability to mentally step into a different structural reality.
Well, that completely explains why grammar textbooks fail to produce fluent speakers.
Right.
A book asks nothing of your ego. You sit at a desk, you remain entirely rooted in your own cultural identity, and you just fill in blanks on a worksheet.
It's completely safe.
Right. The textbook never asks you to change your psychology. But this active mirroring, this embodiment, it demands vulnerability.
It demands vulnerability, and it demands the suspension of judgment. I mean, you cannot successfully mirror a cadence if your subconscious is actively evaluating it as, too slow or too abrupt based on your own native standards.
But, okay, this brings up a pretty severe logistical problem.
That's it.
If the key to fluency is this vulnerable, active, psychological mirroring, where does the learner actually do this? You can't practice psychological mirroring in the middle of a high-stakes business negotiation.
No, definitely not.
The cost of failure is just way too high.
Yeah, the real world is entirely too unforgiving for that kind of cognitive practice.
Right. And the traditional classroom is equally flawed, just for the opposite reason. The classroom is too rigid. You've got fluorescent lights, a designated authority figure, and an environment built entirely around evaluation and grading. It triggers what linguists call the affective filter.
Your anxiety spike.
Exactly. Your defenses go up,
Yeah.
and your willingness to adopt a vulnerable, silly-feeling foreign persona drops to absolute zero.
Which necessitates the creation of a completely different environment. And this really leads us to the final concept in our sources, the application of edutainment to create a digital third place.
Here's where it gets really interesting for the modern learner, because the third place is originally a concept from sociology, right?
Yeah.
Detailing where humans spend their time.
Right, the first place is the home.
Yep. And the second place is the workplace or the school. And both of those places are defined by structural hierarchies, specific roles, expectations.
So they're evaluative environments, you're being judged.
But the third place is like the local London pub or a neighborhood Tokyo coffee shop.
Yeah.
It's this neutral ground characterized by the total removal of formal structures. The primary focus is just genuine human connection.
Exactly.
And the research points out that modern online learning, specifically high-quality audio and edutainment, is attempting to synthesize this environment digitally.
And this raises an important question. How does that relaxed third place actually aid technical language acquisition?
Right.
Well, the intersection of education and entertainment isn't just a marketing tactic to keep you listening. It serves a profound cognitive function. By pairing high-quality audio production with authentic, unscripted dialogues, these spaces simulate the low-stakes vibe of a cafe.
They bypass that affective filter we talked about. Like if a learner is listening to an engaging, unscripted conversation between two native speakers, the brain doesn't process it as an impending prompt quiz.
Nope.
The brain processes it as just eavesdropping on a fascinating conversation at the table next to them. So the defenses drop.
And when those psychological defenses drop, the learner is finally in a safe space to practice those high-stakes cognitive mechanisms. The digital third place provides the perfect environment for a specific technique the research calls shadowing.
Shadowing, which is basically the mechanical application of the psychological bridge.
Yes.
When you shadow, you're listening to that unscripted dialogue, and you speak aloud simultaneously, lagging just a fraction of a second behind the native speaker.
Right.
You're matching their pitch, their emotion, and their speed in real time.
It literally forces the brain out of passive abstraction and into physical articulation. But the crucial element here, and why the third place absolutely must utilize unscripted dialogue, is the nature of the language itself.
Because unscripted language is incredibly messy.
It is entirely disorganized. Traditional learning materials provide the sanitized, pristine version of the language. They edit out all the hesitations, the overlapping speech, the idioms.
But those perceived imperfections are actually the cultural operating system manifesting in real time.
Exactly.
Like filler words. This is such a critical point from the text. In a textbook, filler words are treated as garbage data. But in the real world, how a culture pauses, how they hesitate, the idiomatic expressions they use to fill dead air. That is the actual source code.
The idioms are the shortcuts of the archetype. So when a learner is shadowing an unscripted conversation in a digital third place, they are forced to shadow the idioms and the hesitations.
Right.
If you're shadowing a fast-paced cosmopolitan archetype, you physically feel the velocity of their idioms. You train your vocal cords and your brain to process that rapid transactional flow.
Wow. And if you're shadowing an unscripted dialogue from a traditional consensus-building archetype, you're physically training your brain to tolerate the silence.
Yep.
You're shadowing the long pauses. You are practicing the linguistic caution that builds trust in that specific environment. You're downloading the why of the culture directly into your muscle memory.
This is really the synthesis of the entire framework. Shadowing unscripted edutainment in a digital third place bridges the gap between understanding the metropolitan archetype intellectually and embodying it psychologically.
It fundamentally changes the objective of studying. Like you're no longer trying to memorize a map. You're actively training your brain to navigate the territory.
Yeah, exactly.
You're using the relaxed environment of the third place to run simulations of a foreign operating system until the code executes naturally.
And the implications of this methodology extend far beyond simply, ordering coffee or attending a business meeting without causing offense.
Right.
When we analyze this from a macro perspective, the shift from memorization to cognitive embodiment completely alters the learner's relationship to the global community.
It moves you from an observer to a participant. I mean, when you rely solely on formal vocabulary, you're fundamentally communicating as a tourist.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You're basically asking the native speaker to translate your clunky foreign operating system into something they can understand. You're putting the entire cognitive burden on them.
Which breeds the very cultural friction the learner is trying to avoid.
Right.
But when you've put in the work to cross that psychological bridge, when you've shadowed their cadence and internalized their archetypal priorities, you are signaling deep respect. You're communicating to the native speaker that you value their framework enough to adopt it.
It builds an instant baseline of trust. You aren't just exchanging data, you are aligning with their rhythm.
And that alignment is the true definition of fluency. It's the ability to navigate the unwritten social contracts of a city as seamlessly as the people who are shaped by it.
So, synthesizing everything we've unpacked from the research today for you listening.
Hmm.
To actually decode a culture, you have to abandon the binary grid of the traditional map. You have to analyze the overarching archetype of the environment, whether it prioritizes tradition and consensus or speed and transactional efficiency.
Right.
Then, you have to actively build a psychological bridge by utilizing the mechanism of shadowing. You must seek out those unscripted digital third places, lower your defenses, and physically mirror the messy, idiomatic reality of the language.
You have to step out of your own cultural ego and basically practice the cognitive empathy required to inhabit theirs.
Which leaves a really compelling question regarding the future of how we acquire knowledge. We've established through this research that traditional classrooms and sanitized textbooks are fundamentally inadequate for teaching the complex, nuanced reality of human communication.
They definitely fail because they isolate the data from the environment and the psychology.
Right. We need the unscripted third place to actually rewire our brains for cultural fluency.
Because the digital third place succeeds by embracing the complexity rather than trying to edit it out.
Exactly. So consider the broader applications of this mechanism. If the digital third place is the superior environment for absorbing the intricate operating systems of language and culture, how might this exact model revolutionize the way we acquire other highly complex interpersonal skills?
Oh, that opens up an entirely new paradigm for adult education.
Think about the skills that define professional and personal success: conflict resolution, high-stakes negotiation, leadership, crisis management.
Yeah.
Currently, we try to learn these interpersonal dynamics exactly the same way we used to learn languages, by reading sanitized case studies in rigid formal environments. We try to memorize the vocabulary of leadership from a textbook.
But leadership, just like language, is deeply unscripted.
Right. It is messy, emotional, and heavily reliant on rhythm and nuance.
So if we can use audio edutainment to shadow cultural fluency, we could theoretically construct third places to shadow negotiation or conflict de-escalation.
Imagine the cognitive leap if, instead of reading a book on negotiation tactics, you spent hours in a digital third place, actively shadowing the cadence, the pauses, and the emotional restraint of master negotiators doing unscripted high-stakes interactions.
Wow.
You wouldn't just be learning the theory. You'd be downloading the operating system of a leader directly into your muscle memory. It suggests that any skill relying on human behavior cannot simply be studied. It must be simulated, embodied, and shadowed.
That's a profound shift in perspective.
Something for you to consider the next time you find yourself trying to learn a complex human skill from a static page. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the territory, and we'll see you next time.